Hey guys, Urban Combat Survivor here. I want to do a video here about a press release from the United Nations this week. And I'm a little bit behind on some videos that I wanted to put out, but my internet was down because of the storm that ran up the East Coast this week. And I'm behind, but I really want to get this video in first. There's a couple of things about this news article. It doesn't matter which news article you read about it, actually. If you just Google United Nations warns of civil unrest, global civil unrest, you'll come across a bunch of articles about it, and it really doesn't matter which one you read. What really matters is the quotes from the initial press release, and if you can get a hold of the initial press release, that's great, read that too. A couple of things about this struck me. One of them is the fact that, as far as I'm aware, there's never been a global scale issuance of a warning to governments, first world governments, of a possibility of global scale civil unrest. As far as I'm aware, that's unprecedented in history. Now, the UN, in my opinion, is pretty damn alarmist. So I'm not running because the sky is falling when the UN says something. Ultimately, I think the United Nations, they have an agenda, and that's a whole different video. But there's a couple of things about this, though, that really caught my attention and really struck me, and I want to talk about those. One of those things is this. There are a lot of different offices to the United Nations, and what strikes me is that it isn't the Security Council, anyone on the Security Council that released this. It was the guy in charge, the Director General of the ILO, that released this statement. And one of the things that struck me about it is not only was it the ILO, International Labor Organization, you really want to read about those guys if you don't know who they are. Not only was it the Director General of the ILO, rather than someone on the Security Council that issued this, but it was also done, if you read the wording carefully, it was done in a way and kind of promoted as a way to push a certain agenda. So on one hand, yes, they're warning of a possibility of global civil unrest, but they're doing so in a way that's trying to force through a transnational union type agenda. They're talking about this is going to come, and the only way to stop this is to put out more stimulus package, which is basically what the Obama administration was trying to force European countries into 6 months ago. He was actually sending representatives, Tim Geithner was actually sending threats, basically threats, to European countries because they wouldn't go along with this anymore. And now some of those European countries, the Obama administration, for instance, advised Greece to just default on the 400 billion euros that they owe, but that's a whole other video. What I want to talk about is this. One, it is something at least to take note of that the first time in history that I'm aware of, anyway, I may be wrong, and if I am, please correct me, but the first time in history that there's ever been a serious issuance of a threat of global scale civil unrest to first world countries. That's first. The fact that they're trying to tie it to a union agenda is basically just their concept of never let a crisis go to waste. That's not important in this. What's important in this is the fact that the individual governments involved are what makes up the United Nations. So basically what's going on here is the individual governments of first world countries are recognizing the threat of global scale first world country civil unrest. And that in and of itself is a little bit concerning. Beyond that, they're trying, if you've ever read anything about Cloward Piven and that whole strategy that's going on right now that this current administration is trying to use, it looks exactly like that's what's going on with this. It's tying right into it. So it's the Labor Department, the Director General of the International Labor Organization under the UN is the one that issued this warning. So that right there is something to just get you thinking. Pay attention to who's doing this. And they're trying to push a kind of quasi-socialist union-ish agenda and force, kind of through threat, via threat, they're trying to kind of force first world governments to start pushing these ineffective socialist style stimulus packages that have shown they don't work, period. They're not going to ever work. And I think anybody who's passing them at this point realizes they're not going to work. They're not for that. They're for another agenda. They're just putting it under this name, kind of like Bill S510. If you haven't read about that mess, Senate Bill S510, go read that shit. And if you have a garden, it affects you. If you grow one tomato plant, it affects you. So you want to go read that. But so I wanted to talk about that. I wanted to basically just give my thoughts on the fact that, or just my general concern on the fact that the United Nations, which is made up of member states, which is basically a bunch of governments that are saying they believe that global scale civil unrest may be on the way. The fact that these governments are acknowledging this through this third party agency, this third party organization, in and of itself is, I wouldn't quite call it validation of concerns and people who are getting ready, but I would call it an alarm bell. A tiny one, because the UN, the sky is always falling with the UN. But the fact that they're acknowledging this, and they're acknowledging it to a degree that they feel they can use it to further agendas, use it as a scare tactic, I think is something that, at least for me, is gonna kind of ramp up my efforts just a tad. I'm going to divert just a little bit more of my attention and my daily thinking and financing and that kind of thing towards making sure I'm prepped up properly. Because once the governments are acknowledging it, I think at that point, if they're trying to use it rather than trying to correct the problem, then they're not going to stop it. That means they see it, and they're just going to try to use it. They're not going to try to stop it from happening. So that's my concern. That's what I wanted to mention about it. I also think people need to pay attention to who's releasing these statements. It's not just the UN, it's the ILO, and those boys have an agenda. So look them up. Look at their affiliations with the AFL-CIO. Look at their affiliations with the SEIU. And pay attention to the way all these labor unions, these labor organizations, remember, the labor organizations were the ones running everything in Russia when they were communist. So pay attention to these guys. They're the ones that have collapsed Greece. These are the same people that are about to collapse Spain. The same people that have these riots this last week going on in Brussels and all these other places. These labor organizations are the ones that are causing this. And now they're looking to use the unrest itself that they have caused. They're trying to spin that around and make it their own agenda. So pay attention, folks. Be careful with this. Don't let the wording slip by you. Whenever you see a piece like this, please stop, slow down, and pay attention to the wording. Don't just skim through and get the message, because they're sneaking shit in on you. Pay attention to the wording. Then down the road they can say, well, look, I've been saying this for 2 years. Nobody paid attention, but they've been saying it. Start paying attention, because those of us in this country have seen what happens when you don't pay attention to what the man is saying who's running for office. So just keep your eyes open and keep your heads clear. Pay attention and keep trucking, folks. Herman Combat Survivor, signing off.